Welcome to Time Monk Radio. You are listening to part 21 of our 24-part series, Marvelous Mints, The Wise Woman Way, with Susan Weed at Time Monk Radio. Hello, Susan. Welcome back to Time Monk Radio.
Thank you. You know, Jim and I, last month, we focused in on the minty mints, the spearmint and the peppermint and the oregano and marjoram and basil, really common mints. And to go to a far extreme, this month, we're going to be focusing in on mints that are not only rare mints, but they're rare plants. They're plants that generally grow in really small geographical areas or that are sometimes difficult to find. However, you will notice as we talk about these, that these are plants that people do cultivate. If you're interested in them, you can find seeds and plants for sale as well as the actual plant material. I was just mentioning, Jim and I, that one of the more interesting websites that I visited was Erowid, E-R-O-W-I-D. And this is a gathering place for people who are interested in psychoactive plants. And I'll be reading you some of the posts there that people put up. But we're going to start with Pennyroyal, which is seemingly quite familiar. As a matter of fact, I was quite thrilled when I first moved to the land that I've been living on since 1978 to discover that there was pennyroyal here in this land. And the pennyroyal that we're talking about is Hedioma paludioides, American pennyroyal, also known as mosquito plant or tickweed. And I often tease that pennyroyal is such a tiny little plant that you usually find it by smelling it because you're standing on it. It likes to grow in open areas like paths, so you do indeed tread upon it. And the scent of the pennyroyal is perhaps the strongest of all the mints. From this tiny little plant arises this almost eye-watering smell of pennyroyal. No wonder it was considered a plant to keep mosquitoes away, a plant to keep ticks away. Rub your body with this, and no insect in its right mind would consider coming near you. The botanical name, paludioides, means makes fleas go away. So pennyroyal has been well known for a long time to be an absolute bane to insects. So there I was on my land. Oh my gosh, so excited. And there was pennyroyal. I tread upon it and I smelled it. And I thought, wow, when it's in flower, I'm going to go out and I'm going to harvest some pennyroyal. And I did. And I went out, I walked around between my neighbors and I, there's several hundred acres that I had access to. And I was able to harvest enough pennyroyal to dry and to make almost an ounce of dried pennyroyal. And then I thought, well, wow, like if I use even a little bit of it as tea, that ounce is going to go pretty fast. And I just spent like 4 or 5 hours walking around the woods. Not that I didn't enjoy myself, but I spent quite a bit of time looking for that pennyroyal and cutting it and so on. So the next year, I got wise, and I went out. I spent about 30 minutes. I got enough pennyroyal to stuff a nice-sized jar. I poured vodka over it, and I still have that pennyroyal tincture. I made it in 1980.
Oh, wow.
And pennyroyal is a strong herb. When you use it, you're going to want to be packing a punch. You're not going to say, oh, just a little pennyroyal. Oh, well, no, pennyroyal is for when we want to, really do something. The smell of it, that tiny little plant with this big, almost aggressive smell, as I said, almost eye-watering smell. And, of course, pennyroyal is most known in the popular culture as an abortifacient, as an herb that women turn to when they don't want to be pregnant. And so, again, using pennyroyal tincture is going to be more effective than using pennyroyal tea. Now, I don't actually believe that pennyroyal is very effective in this regard. And one of my friends who really likes to be wonderfully scientific about things and runs a big women's health clinic and so can get lots of people to volunteer for things, actually looked at whether or not herbs like pennyroyal can, to use the euphemism, bring on a late period. And what she found was that in general, no. These herbs could literally bring on a late period if the woman was going to menstruate anyhow, and it was late for some reason. Herbs like pennyroyal would bring the period on, and we've talked about that throughout our time, talking about mints, that the mints have a very strong effect on the uterus. But what my friend who runs a clinic in Switzerland found was that any woman who was actually pregnant, the herbs did not seem to affect a miscarriage. So, that said, I want to talk about something that's a little bit scary. And let me start off by talking about a woman that I love a lot, Janine Parvati. And she writes under the name Janine Parvati Baker. And one of her books was a very early herbal women's health stand powerful woman's book called Hygeia, a Woman's Herbal. And Janine and I were wonderful friends. And I said to her at one point, I said, Janine, you know, Hygeia is a great book and it's a classic book and every woman should own a copy of Hygeia. I said, but it's the worst herbal ever written. She said, you're so right. And one of the reasons that it's the worst herbal ever written is that it is dangerous. And it's dangerous because a little knowledge is a dangerous thing. Mm-hmm. So if you are pregnant and don't want to be pregnant, and you wonder if there are herbs that could help you, and you open Hygeia, a Woman's Herbal, and look under herbs that will bring on a late period, you will find a list of herbs, many of them mints, and of course, including pennyroyal. But that's all you get is the name of the herb. So you're probably not an herbalist. You're going to go to a store that sells herbs and foods and things like that. And you're going to go up to the counter and you're going to say, I'd like to buy some pennyroyal. And the person behind the counter is going to say, well, we have pennyroyal in several forms. What form would you like? And you are going to say, give me the strongest form, and that's going to be essential oil of pennyroyal. It has not happened in several decades. But back in the 70s and 80s, women died because they took essential oil of pennyroyal in an attempt to have a natural abortion, and it caused either their liver or their kidneys to stop working. So, pennyroyal has a lot of uses. And pennyroyal is a big, powerful, maybe even scary herb. That's what we're talking about this month, the scary mints, the psychoactive mints, the big mints that are actually little. They're little. They don't grow in a lot of places because their effects are huge, absolutely huge. The American pennyroyal that I use and that I'm familiar with is actually an annual plant. It seems like a perennial because it creates so many seeds, and many of the mints are profusely self-seeding. And it creates so many seeds each year that it grows again and again and again in exactly the same places. so that once you find it, you can usually go back and find it in the same spot year after year, making one think that it would be a perennial. Also, the fact that it produces such a huge amount of oil would also make one think that it would be a perennial. But then when we look at how tiny it is, it's on the order of the size of thyme. And a well-grown thyme plant even outdoes the pennyroyal. Now, there is a larger pennyroyal, a Mediterranean pennyroyal, that is not as strongly scented. And often, if you're growing a garden and you want, pennyroyal in your garden, that will be the one that you get. And it actually prefers different kinds of things. Maud Greaves, in her book, A Modern Herbal, talks about pennyroyal and calls it the smallest of the mints and different in habit from all other mints. She says that common names for it are lurk in the ditch, pudding grass, run by the ground, and let's see if I can say this one, Pileio L'Oreal. Pileio L'Oreal. What a beautiful musical name for it. And she says that Pileio L'Oreal comes from Pileio Royal, which comes from Pelugium Royal. And pudding grass is a grass just means wart, she says. Don't get overly concerned about the fact that it's not a grass, but it was indeed sometimes used to season food, although, like sage and rosemary, in tiny, tiny, tiny amounts. Pennyroyal, she says, was in high repute among the ancients. Both Pliny and Dioscorides described it as having numerous virtues. In Europe, we find frequent reference to pennyroyal in both Anglo-Saxon and Welsh works on medicine. The Book of Secrets of Albertus Magnus on the virtue of herbs, stones, and certain beasts states that if you put drowning flies and bees in the warm ashes of pennyroyal, they will recover their life after a little time, like within the space of 1 hour, and be completely revived. I'm not exactly sure why one would want to revive flies. And by drowning, I'm not quite sure what he means by that either. But last summer, we were doing some herbal preparations with honey. And we left the lid of the honey jar and went off to do something good. When we came back, there were about 100 bees in the honey jar.
Yes.
And they were totally covered. They were drowning in honey. They were covered in honey. And we very carefully, with a single chopstick, fished them out of the honey, put them down in the sun, and they were immediately clustered about by other bees who began to groom them and eat the honey off them.
Interesting.
And so they were all able to fly away.
Very good.
It was quite fascinating. We're like, oh, look at that, right? The other ants were coming, and the other bees were coming and just like slurping the honey off of their sisters. It was a beautiful, beautiful sight to see.
I bet so.
But I'm not sure what Albertus Magnus was doing, drowning flies and then reviving them with the ashes of pennyroyal. It always seems just a little odd for me. Maud Greaves said that pennyroyal is a classic plant for the cottage garden, and that it was there for the classic reasons to help relieve menstrual problems and to help relieve digestive problems as well. So wherever we live, wherever we are, whatever mint there is usually the one that we're going to use. Turner, also an older herbalist, says pennyroyal has many little leaves. They grow in little branches and little tufts, and it grows sometimes we're just watery. Now, the interesting thing is that the two kinds of pennyroyal are quite different in this respect. The more rounder-leafed pennyroyal, which is the one that is usually grown, as I said, in the garden, is a plant that likes water and does just fine with water. But the Mentha pelugiotum does not like to have its feet wet. It likes to have its seeds wet. So it sprouts in the spring in places that are wet, but those places have to dry up by the time we hit summer. And we think about that powerful essential oil that the pennyroyal is producing and how these essential oils are protection. They're volatile oils that the plants produce to protect themselves. And the hotter, the drier it is, and the poorer the soil. Remember I said that that pennyroyal here grows in among the rocks. So the hotter it is, the drier and the poorer the soil, the more oil that pennyroyal is going to make. So in fact, the wild pennyroyal is wild because it's not a very good garden plant. It doesn't like to be fussed over and have things done to it. One of the appalling things that I did as a novice herbalist was to try to use pennyroyal to get rid of fleas. Hey, now, what's so appalling about that, Susan? Its name means makes fleas go away, so it should make fleas go away. But what was appalling, of course, was that I, like most people, went for what is strongest. I had a cat. The cat had some fleas. I thought I was doing a good thing by not giving the cat any kind of medication. But by buying some pennyroyal oil, and I bought the pennyroyal oil in a collar. The collar was already infused with pennyroyal oil, and you could put it around your cat's neck. And my cat was one of the cats. About a third of all cats are violently allergic to pennyroyal. And she began to claw at her neck and to foam at the mouth and to stagger around. And that was one of my very first intimations that essential oils are not herbal, and they're not natural, and they're not necessarily better than drugs when what we want to do is kill something. Now, if what we want to do is to use, say, pennyroyal or any other mint to ward things off, that does seem to work. Catnip, you'll remember, has been found by the United States Army to be as effective in repelling biting insects as DEET, the big chemical that most people spray themselves with or their clothes with to repel ticks, mosquitoes, chiggers, all kinds of biting things. So, not just catnip, but pennyroyal. Why? I asked myself, why would they have worked with catnip and not pennyroyal? Because pennyroyal certainly has more of a reputation. And the answer, I think, was the pennyroyal is not in abundance and catnip is. The pennyroyal, even when you can grow it, is small and catnip is big. So why not let's study a plant that if we decide we want it, we can really cultivate and get some bulk of it rather than study pennyroyal. But I suspect that tincture of pennyroyal sprayed on the skin would be just as effective as catnip. Tincture sprayed on the skin at repelling anything that would want to bite you. But this is different than killing things. Once there is an infestation of fleas, once the tick is already on us, then bumping up to use pennyroyal oil is not going to be safer or more effective than using other more appropriate means, which may sometimes include drugs. Not having totally learned my lesson, of course, I got the collar off the cat, and she revived, and thank goodness I didn't just put it on her and walk away, but sat there with her and was able to see her reaction to it. And you will notice that these collars are generally not sold anymore. There were a lot of essential oil-infused collars for dogs and cats. But as I said, my cat, although in a minority, was not a rarity in her quite strong reaction to the essential oils, including pennyroyal, that were in that collar. So you would think Susan would have learned her lesson, but no. Susan decided that the problem was that it was a collar, and so it was around her entire neck, and that was too much, and it was near her nose, and cats are very sensitive to smells, and essential oils smell really strong, and pennyroyal smells really strong, and too close to her eyes. And so I decided that instead what I would do is I would take a single drop of pennyroyal oil and I would put it on my finger, and I would put it on her belly where the fleas were hanging out. And all of the fur in the area where I put that single drop of pennyroyal oil fell out.
Oh, no.
So, as I said, appalling experiences. Fortunately, in neither instance was the cat permanently hurt, but it certainly allowed me to see that I was not understanding how powerful plants can be. Pennyroyal, which grows wild in the United States, was considered a headache remedy by the native people. And it was used, as many mints have been used, rubbed into the temples, especially with pennyroyal. It's very easy if you rub your hands together and get them warm and then stroke the pennyroyal plant. You don't even have to pick it. You stroke the pennyroyal plant, and there's so much volatile oil, it will come into your fingertips and then rub your temples. One of the strongest of the oil-producing mints, and so lots of different ways to use it. Of course, and I think obviously, but I will say it even though it goes without saying, every book is going to warn against using pennyroyal if you are pregnant. Remember, my friends, experiment, which she had quite a few women helping her, none of whom knew whether or not they were actually pregnant, that pennyroyal was not, in fact, effective. Nonetheless, since most of us like to make our errors toward the side of caution, it's certainly a good idea. You will also remember that I said that basil has a reputation of being an abortifacient as well. And all of the mints, in fact, certainly the stronger the mint, the stronger the possibility, because they have an affinity for the uterus, have a reputation of being iffy for women who are pregnant, especially women who don't feel strong in their pregnancy. Pliny gives a long list of disorders for which pennyroyal is a remedy, and especially recommends hanging it in sleeping rooms. He goes on that it is more conducive to health than roses. Now, again, we might kind of like furrow our brows and say, what a strange idea to hang an herb in a room and say it's conducive to health. But remember two things. First of all, for centuries, we believed that what caused sickness was bad air. Malaria, in fact, is bad air. And there is a certain amount of truth to that. Pennyroyal being an antiseptic, pennyroyal being an antibacterial, hung in a room would, in fact, be more effective, more powerful than roses in clearing the air and clearing any contagion out of the air. And secondly, the idea, which has not survived, but I would think would be interesting to revive, that while we sleep, we are especially open to influences. That our sleeping state is a vulnerable state.
I've heard that.
Yeah. And that we can make use of that vulnerability to improve our health. So the idea of hanging a bundle of herbs by the bed that one would smell while sleeping was actually something that was commercially successful up until about 120 years ago. And there were all kinds of bundles and devices and so on that would emit odors while you were sleeping to help change your health. And of course, it got very specialized. But pennyroyal cleareth the lungs and the breast from all sick humors. A garland of pennyroyal made and worn about the head is great force against swimming in the head and the giddiness thereon. So I guess one would not want to wear a pennyroyal wreath if one were going to a party, since one would want to get giddy, eh? Culpepper says, drink pennyroyal with wine, and it is good against venomous bites. Apply it to the nostrils with vinegar to revive those who have fainted or swooned. Dry it and burn it, and use it upon the teeth and gums, and it will strengthen the gums. Pennyroyal helps the sufferer of gout if applied of itself to the place until it is red and applied in a plaster. So I guess we're heating up pennyroyal and applying it to the gouty area. Ouch. Pennyroyal takes away spots or marks upon the face. When applied with salt, it will profit those who are splenic or congested in the liver. Fresh green pennyroyal bruised and put into vinegar is useful to cleanse foul ulcers, and it will take away the marks of bruises and blows about the eyes. We don't want to think too closely about what would cause the marks of bruises and blows about the eyes, do we? But I stopped for a minute here because this is somewhat fascinating to me. When I hurt my wrist in Costa Rica, there was a woman there from Slovakia, and her immediate remedy was to soak a cloth in vinegar and apply it to my swollen wrist. And I thought that I had never heard of that before. But then as I had my eyes newly opened to applying vinegars externally over and over again, I have found, just like we are finding here, that an herbal vinegar is used this way. Well, the vinegar is too. So if you have herbal vinegar, if you have pennyroyal vinegar, lemon balm vinegar, catnip vinegar, and you have blows about the eyes, get out of that relationship. But meanwhile, use some of your mint vinegar to help yourself there. 1 spoonful of the tea sweetened with honey is a wonderful cure for children who are coughing. I would say that pennyroyal is a little strong for children, and we might want to use something more like catnip. Well, once again, we come to the end of our time together. Hope you've enjoyed investigating Pennyroyal a little bit. It's going to get more and more exciting as we go on through this month, so be sure to come back and hang out with us next week when we talk about Coleus, a mild-mannered potted plant that is far more than it seems to be. Dream blessings.
Thank you, Susan, for another fascinating discussion on mints. And this concludes part 21 of our 24-part series, Marvelous Mints, The Wise Woman Way, with Susan Weed at Time Monk Radio.